I woke up inside a freezing intensive care unit with 4 heavy titanium screws drilled directly into my skull and a completely shattered cervical spine. It had been exactly 48 hours since a massive commercial transport truck struck my sedan on a snow-covered Chicago expressway at 3 o'clock in the morning. When my eyes finally fluttered open against the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights, I instinctively expected to see my family gathered anxiously around my hospital bed. Instead, the sterile white room was entirely empty. My parents had driven straight to O'Hare International Airport while I was bleeding out on an operating table. They boarded a first-class flight to Miami to attend my older brother's lavish decentralized finance application launch party, a highly publicized event that I had personally funded with my own capital just hours before the crash. They chose his extravagant red carpet moment over my actual survival. For 7 agonizing days, immobilized in that cold room. There were no phone calls, no floral arrangements, and absolutely no visits from my blood relatives. But the overnight trauma nurse eventually showed me the lobby's security footage. A mysterious stranger had been entering the hospital every single night while I was trapped in a medically induced coma. She left obscure technical gifts, asked clinical questions about my spinal vitals, and then vanished into the dark Chicago winter. I had absolutely no idea who she was until she finally pulled back her hood on the surveillance feed. And that was the exact moment I realized the massive car crash was not just a tragic twist of fate. My name is Zuri. I am 32 years old, and I work as a senior blockchain security architect and cryptocurrency exchange auditor. If you have ever had to execute a ruthless, highly calculated corporate strategy against a toxic family who used you for your wealth and abandoned you in your darkest hour, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you will absolutely want to hear exactly how I used a hidden algorithmic backdoor to financially annihilate my brother's stolen tech empire while physically paralyzed in a hospital bed. The first sensory detail that registered in my foggy brain was the blinding, relentless glare of the overhead surgical lights searing straight through my closed eyelids. Then came the terrifying mechanical sound. It was a rhythmic, aggressive hissing and electronic beeping that seemed to reverberate directly inside my own skull. I tried to turn my head to escape the harsh light, but a blinding, white-hot explosion of pure agony shot straight down my neck and violently radiated through the base of my spine. I gasped sharply, choking on the dry, recycled hospital air, and my eyes flew wide open in sheer terror. I could not move my head even a single millimeter. I panicked, desperately trying to lift my hands to my face, but my arms felt as though they had been cast in solid concrete. A suffocating wave of claustrophobia flared violently in my chest. I shifted my eyes wildly, frantically trying to make sense of my terrifying surroundings. I was physically trapped inside a heavy metal cage. Cold steel rods pressed brutally against my temples, and I realized with a sickening, dizzying wave of absolute horror that the heavy bolts were physically screwed deep into my skull bone. It was a cervical halo brace. I was completely, utterly immobilized in intensive care bed, hooked up to a chaotic, tangled web of intravenous tubes and physiological monitoring wires. The air in the room smelled harshly of industrial antiseptic, iodine, and bleach. Every single breath I managed to pull into my lungs felt like expanding shards of broken glass tearing through my chest wall. I tried to speak, but my throat was agonizingly dry and severely bruised from the intubation tube, producing nothing more than a weak, raspy clicking sound. The fragmented memories of what had put me in this horrific mechanical bed were a chaotic, terrifying blur of screeching tires, shattering windshield glass, and the violent, deafening crunch of heavy metal folding violently in on itself. It had been snowing heavily on the interstate. I remembered driving home late at night from my corporate office in the financial district. I remembered massive, blinding headlights coming out of the swirling white snow, aggressively crossing the median directly into my lane. Then there was absolutely nothing but total, suffocating darkness. The heavy wooden door to my ICU room pushed open quietly, and a woman wearing navy blue hospital scrubs walked briskly inside. She was a black woman in her early 50s with incredibly sharp, observant eyes and a kind but strictly professional, no-nonsense demeanor. Her laminated identification tag read Altha. When she saw my open, terrified eyes darting around the room, she froze in her tracks for a fraction of a second before moving swiftly to my bedside. She checked the digital physiological monitors mounted above my head, her hands moving with the practiced, rapid efficiency of a veteran trauma nurse. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Zuri," she said, her voice remaining incredibly calm and steady. grounding me instantly in the terrifying reality of the intensive care unit. You are currently at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. You were involved in a catastrophic high-speed motor vehicle collision on the expressway. Do not attempt to nod or move your neck under any circumstances. You have suffered a severe C4 cervical spinal fracture, and you are wearing a halo brace to physically stabilize your spinal cord. You have been in a medically induced coma for exactly 48 hours. 48 hours, the heavy, impossible words echoed violently inside my foggy mind. 2 entire days had simply vanished from my existence. I swallowed hard, fighting the agonizing sandpaper-like dryness in my throat, forcing my vocal cords to produce a sound. My parents, I whispered, the raspy sound barely audible over the mechanical hum of the life support machines. Where are Cecilia and William? Altha stopped writing on her plastic medical clipboard. The silence that instantly followed my question was incredibly heavy and completely suffocating. She did not meet my eyes immediately. Instead, she deliberately adjusted the thermal blanket over my paralyzed legs, taking her time. It was the highly practiced, calculated hesitation of a seasoned medical professional, giving herself a brief moment to figure out exactly how to deliver devastating bad news. My heart rate monitor picked up speed, the electronic beeping growing significantly faster and much louder in the quiet room. They were here, Altha finally said, her voice gentle but incredibly guarded. They came into the waiting room the night. The paramedics brought you through the emergency room doors. I let out a small painful breath of intense relief. Where are they right now? Are they sleeping in the surgical waiting room? Can you please tell them I am awake? Altha let out a slow, heavy sigh. Her dark, observant eyes met mine, filled with a highly disturbing mixture of professional clinical detachment and deep, profound personal pity. Zuri, they left the hospital. They waited exactly long enough for the attending neurosurgeon to explicitly confirm you were not brain dead and that your shattered spine had been surgically stabilized. Once they heard you were out of the immediate critical danger zone, they left the building entirely. They told the front reception desk they had an urgent, non-refundable flight to catch. I stared blankly at the acoustic ceiling tiles, my highly analytical mind absolutely refusing to process the illogical words. A flight to catch. Their youngest daughter was lying broken in a trauma ward with heavy metal pins drilled directly into her skull, and they had a flight to catch. Growing up in the extremely wealthy elite circles of the Chicago metropolitan area, I knew my parents valued their curated social appearances above absolutely everything else. They were relentlessly obsessed with their exclusive country club memberships, their high-profile charitable galas, and presenting the flawless, impenetrable image of Black excellence to the corporate world. But surely this specific situation had to be a massive misunderstanding. My phone, I rasped out, the pain in my neck flaring violently. Where are my personal things? Altha opened a clear plastic patient belongings bag resting on the counter and pulled out my personal cell phone. The glass screen was cracked into a massive, jagged spiderweb pattern from the brutal force of the crash, but the internal hardware still powered on. She carefully held the device up so the facial recognition software could scan my battered face and unlock it, then placed it gently into my hand, helping me grip the smooth edges with my weak, heavily bruised fingers. There was only one unread text message waiting in my inbox. It was from my mother, Cecilia. It was sent yesterday afternoon while I was heavily sedated and fighting for my life. I squinted through the physical pain and the glaring fluorescent light to read the incredibly cruel words on the shattered screen. Zuri, the lead surgeon, informed us that you are clinically stable and resting comfortably. Your father and I simply cannot cancel our first-class flight to Miami for Devon's decentralized finance platform launch. You know exactly how important this massive event is for our family legacy. The primary venture capital investors are already waiting, and the national tech press will be there covering the red carpet. Do not make this weekend about you and ruin his massive Black Wall Street moment. The hospital nurses will take perfectly good care of you. We will call you next week when the launch tour is officially over. Be a supportive sister for once in your life. I read the text message 3 separate times. Each time my eyes scanned the screen, the callous words felt like heavy physical blows raining down on my chest. Do not make this about you. Be a supportive sister for once. I was lying completely immobilized in a trauma ward, unable to turn my head a single inch, fighting through pure agony for every breath I took, and my own mother was actively accusing me of being selfish for almost bleeding to death on the exact weekend of my brother's business event. Devin was 34 years old, the undisputed golden child of the Wallace family dynasty. He was incredibly handsome, exceptionally charismatic, and completely fundamentally incapable of holding down a real corporate job or building anything of actual substance. While I spent my entire 20s ruthlessly grinding my way up the corporate ladder of blockchain architecture, auditing massive decentralized exchanges and making brutal financial decisions to build my own independent 8-figure fortune, Devin played the role of the visionary tech entrepreneur on Instagram. He wore expensive bespoke suits our parents bought for him and pitched conceptual ideas that went absolutely nowhere. And then the ultimate devastating gut punch hit me with the force of a freight train. The memory of the hours right before the snowy car crash rushed back into my foggy mind with terrifying, crystal clarity. The entire reason Devin was having a massive red carpet application launch in a luxury Miami venue was specifically because of me. Just 6 hours before a speeding commercial truck aggressively T-boned my vehicle in the middle of the dark interstate, I had sat directly across from Devin inside my high-rise corner office. I had listened to my parents cry, beg, and emotionally manipulate me for 3 agonizing hours into funding his new cryptocurrency trading startup. I had picked up my customized silver fountain pen and signed a massive seed funding authorization from my own venture capital liquidity pool, a direct wire transfer for exactly $3 million. I had personally funded the very event they abandoned me for. I bought the expensive imported champagne they would be happily drinking on a sunny beach while I lay completely alone in a sterile room listening to the rhythmic, depressing beeping of my heart monitor. My family had successfully extracted the massive liquidity they desperately needed from me, and the exact moment the corporate check cleared the banking system, I ceased to be of any strategic use to them. I closed my eyes as a single hot tear escaped and rolled slowly down my temple, stinging the fresh, bloody surgical wounds near the metal halo pins. I was completely, utterly alone. The parade of white coats began precisely at 7 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Aris, a prominent neurosurgeon with a grim expression and a heavy metal clipboard, walked into my room accompanied by 2 young medical residents. He flashed a practiced, highly synthetic, sympathetic smile before shining a bright penlight directly into my pupils. He asked if I knew my full name, the current date, and exactly where I was. I answered him in a raspy, highly irritated whisper, confirming my cognitive functions were perfectly intact, even if my cervical spine was currently held together by titanium screws. Dr. Aris reviewed my digital charts and murmured quietly to his residents about the severe complexity of the C4 vertebra fracture. Then he looked around the sterile, empty hospital room, his brow furrowed in visible, genuine confusion. Miss Wallace, the hospital administration reached out to your designated emergency contacts immediately last night. Dr. Aris stated, checking his notes. We anticipated your parents would be here for the comprehensive morning assessment. Are they currently en route from the airport? I let out a dry, humorless laugh that immediately sent a violent spasm of pure agony shooting straight down my damaged neck. I squeezed my eyes shut tightly until the sharp pain subsided to a dull, throbbing roar. My parents are currently sipping overpriced mimosas in a luxury VIP lounge in Miami, I replied, my voice dripping with cold, absolute venom. They have a massive tech launch party to attend. My broken neck simply does not fit their required dress code. Dr. Aris exchanged an incredibly uncomfortable glance with his residents. People operating outside of my extreme tax bracket rarely understood the toxic reality of the Wallace family dynamic. They assumed a near-fatal car crash would instantly summon the primal protective instincts of any mother or father. They did not understand that in Cecilia and William Wallace's world, the only thing more important than blood was their public brand. To the rest of Chicago, my parents were the ultimate untouchable embodiment of Black excellence. My father was a prominent commercial real estate developer who served on every prestigious corporate board in the city. My mother was a third-generation legacy in her elite sorority, a woman who treated charity galas like aggressive battlefields and country club luncheons like diplomatic state dinners. To them, our entire family was a carefully curated corporate enterprise. You either contributed beautifully to the aesthetic, or you were hidden away entirely. I was the glaring anomaly. I was the dark-skinned, sharp-tongued, relentlessly practical daughter who refused to play their superficial game. I never cared about the expensive cotillions. I aggressively skipped the debutante balls to intern at a high-pressure private equity firm. I did not marry a prominent doctor or corporate lawyer to secure our elevated social standing. Instead, I built my own massive wealth from the ground up. becoming a senior blockchain architect with a terrifying reputation for being a cold, unlovable calculator. My parents deeply resented my fierce independence, but they happily utilized the enormous wealth it constantly generated. Devon, on the other hand, was the golden prince. He possessed our father's effortless charm and our mother's toxic obsession with status. He was a legacy fraternity member who looked absolutely phenomenal in a tailored tuxedo. He was also a spectacular, undeniable failure. Over the past 8 years, Devon had launched 3 different companies, and every single one had gone totally bankrupt within 18 months. He possessed absolutely zero business acumen. He spent massive funding on corner marketing parties and custom merchandise before ever securing a single paying customer. And every time his fragile house of cards collapsed, William and Cecilia expected me to swoop in and quietly pay off his angry creditors to protect the family name. I was the silent ATM, the cleanup crew they kept strictly in the shadows. Suddenly, a massive surge of adrenaline cut right through the heavy narcotic haze in my brain. The senior blockchain architect inside me woke up violently. The $3 million corporate check had been authorized, but it was structurally coded as a commercial wire transfer pending a final compliance review. I had exactly 48 hours to freeze the transaction before the liquidity cleared the banking bridge. If I was lying here fighting for my actual life while they drank expensive champagne on my dime, I was going to completely cut off their financial oxygen. Altha, I said, my voice gaining an urgent raspy strength. I need you to do something very important for me. The phone you handed me earlier is my personal cell. The screen is completely shattered and I cannot securely access my banking applications on it. I had a second device in my handbag when the paramedics brought me in. A sleek black heavily encrypted work phone. I need it right now. Altha frowned deeply, her hands pausing on the plastic IV line. Zuri, the police brought your personal effects in a sealed plastic evidence bag when the ambulance arrived. I cataloged them myself, then please bring me the bag immediately, I commanded. My work phone has the direct encrypted line to my lead attorney and my secondary banking authenticators. I have to stop a massive financial transfer before the banks open on the West Coast. Altha stepped back from the bed, her expression darkening with a disturbing mixture of anger and deep sympathy. She walked over to the small metal locker in the corner of the room and pulled out the clear plastic belongings bag. She held it up so I could see it clearly. Inside was my cracked personal phone, a bloody designer scarf, my leather wallet, and my shattered sunglasses. The black encrypted work phone was simply not there. Where is it? I demanded, a freezing cold sweat breaking out across my chest. I never go anywhere without it. It was physically in my hand when I left the office. Altha walked back to the side of my bed and looked down at me, her eyes filled with an apology she should never have had to make. When your parents arrived at the hospital the night of the crash, Altha said quietly, your father explicitly demanded to see your belongings. He told the nursing staff that you are a relentless workaholic and that dealing with highly stressful corporate matters while recovering from spinal surgery would be detrimental to your health. He said he was taking your work phone for your own peace of mind. The physiological monitors in the room instantly began beeping frantically as my heart rate absolutely skyrocketed. He took it, I whispered, the full, devastating magnitude of the betrayal crushing the breath completely out of my lungs. William Wallace had absolutely not taken my phone out of paternal concern. He was a highly cunning, calculating man. He knew my firm's stringent security protocols. He knew that any major corporate wire transfer required dual-factor authentication sent directly to that specific encrypted device. By taking that phone, he had successfully bypassed my entire security infrastructure. He had intentionally ensured that the $3 million liquidity transfer would process automatically, completely unchecked. They had intentionally cut me off from my financial power while I lay unconscious and bleeding on a surgical operating table. He had effectively locked the massive vault and walked away with the only key, leaving me utterly defenseless. My own father had robbed me blind. Zuri, your heart rate is dangerously high. You need to calm down, Altha urged, placing a warm, steadying hand on my shaking shoulder. You cannot move your neck, you are going to severely hurt yourself. He stole it, I choked out, a burning white-hot rage slicing violently through the heavy fog of painkillers. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I would try to stop the funding the second I woke up. They knew I would heavily penalize Devon for leaving me here. They planned this. I stared straight up at the bright, sterile lights of the ICU, unable to shake my head, unable to sit up, entirely unable to physically fight back. I was physically trapped in a rigid cage of titanium and steel, financially crippled by the exact people who shared my biological blood. My parents had calculated the exact statistical risk of my survival. They weighed the life of their broken daughter against the public success of their golden son, and they had comfortably chosen the money. They thought they had successfully neutralized the cold, unlovable calculator. They thought they had secured their legacy and walked away entirely unscathed. They assumed I would simply lie here in the dark and accept my pathetic role as the sacrificial lamb for Devon's glory. I closed my eyes, forcefully commanding my racing heart to steady. The pathetic tears of sorrow were entirely gone, replaced by a chilling absolute clarity. They wanted to play a game of ruthless corporate survival. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The next 7 days dissolved into a grueling, horrific masterclass in human endurance. Severe spinal recovery breaks you down to your most primitive, pathetic state. My entire world shrank to the strict dimensions of my hospital bed and the heavy titanium halo bolted into my skull. The metal pins constantly throbbed, sending sharp spikes of pure agony down my neck every single time I attempted to swallow. I reached medical milestones that the hospital staff celebrated, but these grueling victories were met with deafening silence from my blood relatives. My father did not call for updates, my mother did not send floral arrangements, Devon did not bother to send a single text message to the cracked phone sitting on my bedside table. I was a complete ghost to them. By day 7, the physical fog was completely lifting, replaced by a razor-sharp mental clarity. I needed to see the exact event they deemed more valuable than my life. I asked Altha to borrow her tablet, explaining I needed to look at a public social media page. She warned me that looking at whatever my family was doing would only spike my blood pressure. But I looked her dead in the eye and promised her I was no longer capable of having my heart broken by these people. I just needed tactical information. I navigated to Devon's public profile and immediately found exactly what I was looking for. He had posted a massive 45-minute video of the launch party from the previous evening. The sterile atmosphere of my ICU room was instantly invaded by the thumping bass of luxury event music. Devon had rented an exclusive oceanfront estate in Miami. The backdrop featured the sun setting over the water, casting a golden hue over wealthy tech investors who had flown in for the occasion. Ice sculptures, servers carrying expensive caviar, and massive digital screens displayed the logo of Devon's new decentralized finance platform. An entire cryptocurrency empire built entirely on my stolen capital. The video cut to the main event. Devon and his wife Kendra were standing behind a long marble bar. Kendra was the ultimate status-obsessed chameleon. She came from a prominent old money family that had secretly squandered their fortune decades ago, leaving her with a famous last name and totally empty bank accounts. She was an Instagram influencer who had married Devon specifically to secure her place in the upper echelon of Black society. Kendra gazed out at the crowd, her eyes shining with manufactured, highly performative tears. She proudly declared that this platform was not just a business but a family legacy built on absolute loyalty, profound sacrifice and unbreakable bonds. The unadulterated hypocrisy of her words made my stomach violently churn. But it was not her fake speech that made the remaining warmth in my blood turn completely to ice. It was exactly what she was wearing around her neck. Resting against her collarbone, catching the golden hour sunlight, was a custom, flawless diamond necklace. I knew this specifically because I was the one who had bought it. It was the extremely expensive wedding gift I had purchased for her 2 years ago. And now she was wearing it while delivering a totally fraudulent speech about family loyalty, actively ignoring the fact that the woman who bought it for her was lying broken in a hospital bed, abandoned and left to die. I watched my parents step into the frame, hugging Devon and Kendra, their faces glowing with absolute pride. They were the flawless, impenetrable dynasty. I watched them toast to their massive success, their crystal glasses clinking together directly over the massive liquidity they had bled from my accounts. I did not ask Altha to turn off the tablet. The complete terrifying lack of empathy displayed on that screen severed the absolute final emotional cord tethering me to the Wallace name. I stopped crying forever. The abandoned, heartbroken daughter completely died in that hospital bed. The ruthless blockchain strategist fully took over. I looked at the frozen image of my family on the screen and I did not see a mother, a father, a brother, or a sister-in-law. I saw hostile corporate liabilities. I saw fraudulent assets that required immediate, devastating liquidation. The next morning, the pale Chicago sun crept through the thin hospital blinds. I had not slept a single minute. My mind was a massive furnace of intense calculations for corporate annihilation. The titanium halo brace felt like a heavy crown of thorns, a constant painful reminder of my family's extreme treachery. The heavy wooden door pushed open. Nurse Altha walked in carrying her medical clipboard, but this time her hands held something else. In her left hand was a paper cup of dark roast coffee. In her right hand was a small cardboard box tied tightly with brown twine. Altha closed the door and checked the hallway before stepping completely into the room. She placed the coffee on my tray table and set the small brown box right next to my hand. I looked at the box, then shifted my gaze. What is this? Altha sighed heavily, sitting down in the chair beside my bed. Drink the coffee first, she instructed. I grasped the warm paper cup with my bruised fingers. I took a slow, extremely painful sip. The caffeine hit my system like a jolt of electricity. I lowered the cup and tapped the cardboard box with my index finger. I asked you a question, Altha. What is this? Who sent it? Did my parents suddenly remember they have a daughter? Altha shook her head, her expression entirely serious. No, Zuri, your parents have not called the desk once. This box was left for you at the downstairs nurse's station, and it is not the first one. I frowned deeply. What do you mean it is not the first one? Altha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. This is the 7th night in a row. Every single night between 2 and 3 in the morning, someone comes into the main lobby. They walk straight to the overnight desk, leave a package with your exact name on it, turn around and walk right out. I stared at her, entirely baffled. Someone had been coming here every single night while I was lying unconscious. Why am I just hearing about this right now? I demanded, my blockchain auditor instincts rapidly scanning for threats. Because you were completely unresponsive, Altha said calmly. And because the person never leaves a return address or a name. The hospital protocol for anonymous packages in the intensive care unit is incredibly strict. Security confiscated the first 6, they scanned them, ran them through the X-ray machines, and flagged them as safe but locked them in the basement storage. I managed to intercept this one before the overnight guard officially logged it in. Open it, I pulled the brown twine and it fell away easily. I lifted the cardboard flaps. Inside the box rested a heavy worn hardcover book. The jacket was severely frayed at the edges. I read the gold foil lettering on the spine. It was an obscure, highly technical textbook on decentralized smart contract architecture and advanced algorithmic blockchain security. It was completely out of print. Resting right on top of the book was a sleek matte black USB flash drive. I stared at the specific objects, my mind racing. This made absolutely no sense. I finance technology startups and audit exchanges. But I am not a developer. I do not write code. I buy the people who write code. Why would anyone bring me an outdated coding manual and a flash drive in the middle of the night? This is a highly specific gift, I said to Altha. Who is dropping these off? The delivery person must say something to the staff. Altha crossed her arms. That is the strangest part, Zuri. The person never brings flowers. They never bring balloons. The overnight nurses said the person steps up to the desk and asks highly clinical questions about your condition. They do not ask if you are feeling better. They ask for your exact spinal vitals. They ask the nurses if your C4 vertebrae shows signs of permanent motor loss. They ask if your blood pressure has stabilized and if the halo brace was applied without severe complications. Then they leave the package and vanish into the freezing night. I gripped the edge of the thermal blanket, my brain working in absolute overdrive. The intense pain in my neck completely faded into the background, eclipsed by the rising tide of suspense. None of this aligned with the cutthroat corporate culture I operated in. My world was filled with ruthless competitors, ambitious founders, and wealthy venture investors. If one of my corporate rivals wanted to gloat over my near-fatal accident, they would have sent a massive floral arrangement with a passive-aggressive get-well card. Venture capitalists do not sneak around hospital lobbies in the dead of winter night. We operate in broad daylight, armed with ironclad legal contracts and aggressive press releases. The only people who operate in the shadows are people who have something highly illegal to hide, or people who have something extremely dangerous to expose. Someone is closely tracking my medical data, I stated, my voice completely cold and analytical. Someone knows exactly what happened in that intersection, and they are aggressively monitoring my physical ability to recover. Altha, I need to know exactly what this person looks like. Describe them to me. I cannot. Altha let out a frustrated breath. The overnight staff said it is a woman. but she wears a massive gray hoodie pulled up over her head. She intentionally keeps her face angled downward, she speaks very quietly, she intentionally obscures her identity. I drummed my fingers against the hardcover of the coding book. An anonymous woman sneaking into a hospital, 7 days of absolute silence from my family contrasted by 7 days of relentless secret monitoring from a complete stranger. Altha, I need you to pull the lobby surveillance footage from 2 in the morning. Zuri, absolutely not. Altha's eyes widened in genuine. That is a massive breach of strict hospital protocol. If the administration catches me pulling security feeds for a patient, I will be fired immediately. I understand the severe risk, I countered, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. But you already broke protocol by intercepting this package. You know as well as I do that my family abandoned me. Someone is circling my hospital room in the dark. I need to know if they are a threat or a tactical asset. Altha, please, I have absolutely no one else. Altha stared at me for an agonizing minute. Finally, she cursed under her breath, stood up, and walked briskly out of the room. 10 minutes later, she rolled a medical computer cart into the room, locked the door, and turned the screen toward my face. I told the guard I needed to review footage of a disruptive patient, Altha explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard. We have exactly 5 minutes, watch closely. The screen displayed a grainy feed of the main entrance. The timestamp read 2:14 in the morning, the automatic doors parted and a figure stepped out of the pouring snow. It was a young woman swimming in a massive gray hoodie. She approached the reception desk and placed a small box on the counter. The night nurse asked a question and the woman leaned forward to answer. As she spoke, she reached up and pushed the heavy hood back from her face just enough to be heard clearly. Pause it, I commanded. Altha hit the spacebar, freezing the image. The structural features of her face were unmistakable. High cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes holding exhausted, fierce determination. She was a young black woman, probably no older than 28. I knew exactly who she was. I had never spoken to her, but I had seen her face in the background of Devon's early company promotional photos. She was not a friend, she was the ghost of my brother's past, and she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy his fraudulent future. I lay perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the heavy wooden door of the ICU. I had instructed Nurse Altha to wait by the lobby security desk tonight. If the girl in the gray hoodie showed up, Altha was to bypass the front desk protocols and bring her directly to my room. At exactly 2:45 in the morning, the heavy door handle clicked. Altha slipped into the room first, stepping aside. Behind her stood the woman from the surveillance footage. She stepped into the harsh fluorescent light and pulled back her oversized hood, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that immediately locked onto mine. She did not flinch at the sight of the metal screws drilled into my skull. She simply stared at me, analyzing my broken condition with extreme calculating efficiency. I know exactly who you are, I rasped, shattering the stillness of the room. You are Simone Jackson's. Soane stepped forward, crossing arms tightly over her chest. And you are Zuri Wallace, she replied, her voice steady, icy, and completely devoid of pity. The legendary, ruthless blockchain auditor who just financed the total theft of my intellectual property. Altha quietly locked the door behind them and stood guard. I kept my gaze locked on Simone. My brother Devon has not had an original executable thought in his entire 34 years of existence. I knew the decentralized trading bot algorithm he pitched me was far too sophisticated for his extremely limited intellect. I assumed Devon bought the base code from a bankrupt startup. I did not realize he stole it directly from you. Simone moved to the foot of my bed, her eyes burning with fierce, highly controlled anger. He did not just steal it, Zuri, he orchestrated a complete malicious erasure of my entire existence. 2 years ago, your brother hired me as an independent contractor. He offered me a miserable hourly rate to build what he called a basic cryptocurrency symptom tracker. But I saw an opportunity to build something revolutionary. I spent 18 brutal months coding an advanced predictive decentralized arbitrage engine. I built the neural network entirely from scratch. I created the entire back-end smart contract infrastructure while Devon spent his days networking at country clubs. I let out a slow, painful breath. Let me guess, when the code was finalized and proven to work, he terminated your contract without cause. Simone nodded sharply. He locked me out of the main servers on a Friday night. By Monday morning, he had filed the intellectual property paperwork under his own name, utilizing a shell corporation funded entirely by your parents. He scrubbed my administrative access, wiped my digital contribution logs, and sent a massive cease and desist letter, threatening to bury me in corporate legal fees if I ever tried to claim ownership. "Why come to me?" I demanded, pushing through the agonizing dryness in my throat. "Why sneak into a hospital lobby? If you wanted to sue him, you should have gone to an IP lawyer." "I did go to a lawyer," Simone stated flatly. "They all took at the Wallace family wealth and refused to take the case. I did not have a war chest, but I knew exactly who did. I hacked into Devon's unsecured email servers. It was embarrassingly easy. I saw the $3 million wire transfer authorization you signed. My original plan was to corner you at your corporate office and force you to freeze the funding before the Miami launch." A harsh, bitter chuckle escaped my lips. "We have highly similar strategies, Simone. But you did not find me at my office." "No," Simone said, her intense fire never wavering. "I went to your office on Monday morning. I overheard your executive assistant telling a senior partner that you had been in a catastrophic collision and were currently clinging to life. I came to the hospital that same night. I expected to find your parents demanding the absolute best trauma surgeons. Instead, I stood by the valet stand and watched your parents walk out the front doors with their designer luggage. I heard your mother explicitly tell the driver they were heading straight to the airport for Devon's launch party." The words hit me like physical strikes to my chest, but the blockchain strategist inside me was fully awake, absorbing every single piece of data. "I realized then," Simone whispered, "that the Wallace family rot ran much deeper than corporate IP theft. They did not just steal my code, they left you here to die. You are the financial spine of that entire family. And the moment you were physically paralyzed, they abandoned you." Simone reached into her pocket and pulled out another flash drive, this one metallic and heavy. "I kept coming back because I needed to know if you were going to survive. I needed to see if your mind was still sharp enough to put the pieces together." "I am awake, Simone, and my mind has never been sharper." "What exactly is on that drive?" "Every single line of the original smart contract source code," Simone answered. "Time-cemented, heavily encrypted, and cryptographically signed by me, a full year before Devon ever filed his fraudulent patent. It proves he committed felony wire fraud when he accepted your $3 million investment. In the world of high-stakes crypto finance, felony fraud was a weapon of mass corporate destruction. If a founder committed fraud, the investors had the legal right to execute aggressive penalty clauses. But to ensure the destruction was absolute, I needed Simone." "You have the definitive proof," I said, my voice dropping into a precise, commanding register. "But proof without leverage is entirely useless against people like my parents. They will drag you through appellate courts until you go bankrupt. You cannot fight them alone." Simone crossed her arms, a sharp, knowing smile touching the corners of her mouth. "I know, that is exactly why I am standing in your hospital room at 3 in the morning. I have the digital guillotine, Zuri, but I need you to pull the lever." I stared at the brilliant, furious woman standing at the foot of my hospital bed. She was not asking for charity, and she was certainly not asking for sympathy. She was proposing a lethal, perfectly synchronized, hostile corporate takeover. She wanted her absolute life's work back, and she was entirely willing to help me financially dismantle my own toxic bloodline to get it. It was the most beautiful, ruthless business proposal I had ever heard in my entire career. "My parents think they left me here completely powerless," I said, the words cutting through the sterile hospital air like a scalpel. "They think they successfully severed my access to the massive corporate banking portals when my father stole my work phone. They have no idea I have you. Tell me exactly what you need to execute this." Simone stepped around to the side of my bed, her eyes glowing with the intense, focused energy of a master developer prepared to burn down the entire forest to catch a single thief. "The base code Devon stole is fully operational. It is currently acting as the central nervous system for his entire decentralized exchange. But Devon does not actually understand how the deep neural network learns, and he certainly does not know how to read advanced algorithmic security protocols." Simone paused, glancing at Altha to ensure the door was still securely locked. "When Devon fired me and threatened to bury me in corporate lawsuits, I didn't just walk away crying. I had already built a highly specific fatal backdoor directly into the primary smart contract. It is a completely invisible algorithmic kill switch. The exact microsecond that kill switch is activated, it triggers an aggressive cascading liquidation protocol. It will instantly drain the entire decentralized liquidity pool, completely freezing all trading pairs, and mathematically crashing the platform's internal token value to absolute zero in less than 3 seconds. A genuine dark smile touched my lips, ignoring the sharp pain radiating down my shattered neck. A perfect digital explosive, but if you have the kill switch, why have you not detonated it yet? Because I do not have the authorization keys, Simone explained, her tone completely clinical. To trigger the fatal backdoor, the command must be executed using administrator-level privileges. Devon changed all the standard passwords, but as the primary $3 million seed investor, your venture capital firm possesses an automatic, non-negotiable emergency override protocol embedded in the corporate charter. You have the ultimate execution rights. I have the bomb, Zuri, but you are the only person on Earth who can legally bypass his firewall and hit the detonator. I looked at the black screen of the dead personal phone resting on my tray table. My parents thought they had effectively silenced me. They were completely oblivious to the fact that they had just trapped themselves in an inescapable financial death spiral. I need hardware, I stated firmly. My personal phone is useless for a high-level blockchain override. I need a secure terminal, an encrypted VPN, and direct access to my secondary emergency authentication servers. Altha, who had been listening to the entire exchange with wide eyes, finally stepped forward from the door. I can get you a high-powered medical research laptop from the administration floor, she offered, her voice steady and resolute. They use them for massive diagnostic data rendering. It has more processing power than a standard computer, and the hospital's internal research network is completely insulated from public tracing. Do it, I commanded, and you need to configure the execution script perfectly. When Devon initiates his massive public trading demonstration, we are going to let him load the platform with maximum investor liquidity. We are going to let him stand under the brightest spotlights, and then we are going to execute the kill switch live. The next 3 weeks in the intensive care unit became an incredibly grueling, highly structured countdown to total corporate annihilation. My physical recovery was brutal, excruciating, and profoundly isolating. I endured agonizing physical therapy sessions, slowly learning how to breathe without the terrifying assistance of the mechanical ventilator. Eventually, the trauma surgeons determined my shattered spine had fused enough to remove the agonizing titanium halo brace, replacing it with a stiff, highly restrictive cervical collar. Through it all, the profound silence from my parents and my golden brother remained absolute. They did not call, they did not visit, they completely erased me from their curated public narrative. But their silence was the exact tactical cover I required. While they paraded across luxury stages in Miami and Silicon Valley, pitching my stolen $3 million to gullible institutional investors, I was quietly orchestrating their complete financial execution from a sterile white hospital bed. Altha successfully smuggled the high-powered medical laptop into my room, hiding it securely beneath a stack of thermal blankets during the day. Every single night at exactly 2:45 in the morning, Simone would slip past the overnight security desk, enter my room, and begin the complex coding sequences. We worked together in complete synchronized silence. I utilized my deep knowledge of venture capital legal frameworks to bypass the corporate firewalls Devon thought were impenetrable. I accessed my firm's emergency liquidation portals using secondary biometric verifications that my father was entirely unaware of. Simone successfully linked her algorithmic backdoor directly to my emergency seed investor override command. We built a flawless, invisible digital trap right beneath his feet. The day of Devon's massive, highly publicized public demonstration finally arrived. It was exactly 4 weeks after the snowy car crash. My parents had orchestrated a massive press event in the grand ballroom of a luxury Chicago hotel, inviting the most prominent venture capitalists, tech journalists, and institutional investors in the Midwest. Devon was scheduled to go live at exactly 1 p.m., publicly connecting his revolutionary AI trading bot to a massive live liquidity pool containing over $10 million of raw investor capital. I sat propped up in my hospital bed, the stiff cervical collar holding my neck completely rigid. The heavy medical laptop rested securely on my rolling tray table. Simone sat in the chair beside me, her eyes locked intensely onto the secondary monitor she had connected. Altha stood guard by the closed door, ensuring we would not be interrupted by the afternoon medical rounds. "He is live," Simone whispered, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as a live stream of the hotel ballroom populated on the left side of my screen. The camera panned across the massive opulent crowd. My mother, Cecilia, was standing in the front row wearing an incredibly expensive designer gown, aggressively networking with high-net-worth investors. My father, William, stood beside her, beaming with unearned pride as he shook hands with banking executives. Then the camera zoomed in on the center stage. Devon strode confidently to the podium, wearing a bespoke suit, flashing his trademark charismatic smile. Kendra stood slightly behind him, wearing the flawless diamond necklace I had purchased for her, playing the role of the devoted, successful tech wife. Ladies and gentlemen, Devon's voice echoed through the massive ballroom, oozing with supreme arrogance. Today we are absolutely revolutionizing the decentralized finance market. Our proprietary AI algorithmic trading platform is the future of digital asset liquidity. In exactly 30 seconds, I will initiate the live trading sequence, integrating $10 million of institutional capital into our secure master contract. Welcome to the Wallace family legacy. I watched my brother raise a sleek tablet device, preparing to hit the execution button for the massive crowd. I felt absolutely no sorrow, I felt zero pity, I felt only the cold mechanical precision of a blockchain auditor neutralizing a hostile threat. Simone, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotional inflection. Is the back door synchronized to my emergency seed investor terminal? The script is fully primed and locked, Simone confirmed, her eyes burning with the fierce anticipation of ultimate justice. I just need your master authorization code to arm the detonator. I looked at the live stream. Devon tapped his tablet, a massive digital graph on the stage screen illuminated, showing $10 million of raw capital flooding directly into the central liquidity pool. The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. My parents smiled radiantly, basking in the stolen glory. I turned my focus entirely to the secure terminal on my screen. I typed in my complex 24-character master authorization sequence with my bruised fingers. I did not hesitate for a single microsecond. I commanded. Simone hit the enter key. The algorithmic kill switch detonated with absolute, mathematically flawless precision. On the live stream, the massive digital graph displaying the $10 million liquidity pool suddenly froze. For 2 excruciating seconds, the entire ballroom remained completely oblivious. Then a massive red error message flashed across the gigantic screen. The numbers on the graph began to plummet with terrifying, catastrophic speed. 10 million, 5 million, 1 million, 0. In less than 3 seconds, the entire decentralized liquidity pool was completely drained. The algorithmic backdoor had instantly executed millions of microtransactions, completely collapsing the platform's internal token value and permanently locking the remaining capital in an inaccessible cryptographic burn wallet. The entire startup was mathematically annihilated before the applause even died down. Devon stared at the massive red screen in absolute, uncomprehending horror. He tapped his tablet frantically, his face draining of all color as the system completely locked him out. A low, confused murmur swept rapidly through the crowd of wealthy investors as they checked their own mobile terminals and realized their massive investments had just evaporated into thin air. There must be a slight technical glitch, Devon stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking with sudden, sheer panic. Our engineering team is handling the routing error immediately. But it was not a technical glitch, and the absolute worst was yet to come. The backdoor Simone designed was not just an explosive, it was a highly sophisticated tripwire. The exact microsecond the liquidity pool was artificially drained, the smart contract automatically generated an immutable, cryptographically verified report detailing the explicit IP theft and the fraudulent transfer of the initial $3 million seed funding. It simultaneously emailed that massive evidentiary file directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI field office in Chicago, and every single major tech journalist sitting in that ballroom. I watched the live stream as the phones of every journalist in the front row simultaneously buzzed with the incoming data dump. The confused murmurs in the ballroom instantly mutated into loud, aggressive shouts of outrage. Investors began storming the stage demanding answers. Kendra backed away from Devon, her eyes wide with terror as she realized her fake empire was crashing down around her. My father rushed the stage, aggressively shoving a reporter out of the way, trying to grab the microphone from Devon to control the narrative. But the heavy, unmistakable sound of approaching sirens began to wail loudly from the streets outside the luxury hotel. The SEC and the federal authorities do not hesitate when $10 million of institutional capital vanishes due to wire fraud. The camera feed violently shook as federal agents in dark suits pushed their way through the massive double doors of the ballroom, holding federal warrants, I watched with absolute surgical satisfaction as an agent grabbed Devon's arm, spinning him around and locking heavy steel handcuffs securely around his wrists right in front of the flashing cameras. My mother screamed hysterically, trying to pull the agent away from her golden son, completely destroying her flawless high society image on national television. I calmly closed the heavy medical laptop, terminating the live stream immediately. The absolute destruction of their fake empire was completely finalized. I looked up at Simone, who was staring at the blank screen, a single tear of profound relief sliding down her cheek. She had successfully taken back her life's work, and she had watched the man who stole it be publicly humiliated and arrested on federal fraud charges. "The funds are locked in the burn wallet, Zori," Simone stated, her voice thick with emotion. "The institutional investors will recover their capital through the SEC insurance protocols, but Devon's company is mathematically completely erased." "It is over." "It is not entirely over," I replied, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a senior venture capitalist who had just executed the most successful hostile takeover of my career. "You are currently unemployed, Simone, and I happen to be the managing director of a massive liquidity pool that is currently seeking a highly aggressive, brilliant lead blockchain architect. When I am finally released from this intensive care unit, we are going to build a completely secure, transparent decentralized exchange, and we are going to build it exactly the right way." The subsequent legal and financial fallout over the next 6 months was absolutely catastrophic for the Wallace family dynasty. Devon Wallace did not receive a quiet, dignified corporate settlement. The United States Attorney's Office secured a sweeping, irrefutable federal wire fraud indictment against him based entirely on the cryptographically signed source code Simone had provided. The SEC permanently barred him from ever holding an executive position in any financial institution. But the destruction did not stop with the golden child. Federal investigators rigorously audited the initial $3 million seed funding transfer. They quickly discovered that William Wallace had intentionally bypassed my dual-factor authentication protocols by stealing my encrypted work phone while I was physically incapacitated. My father, the prominent commercial real estate developer, was formally indicted as an active accessory to federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. His massive corporate board memberships were instantly revoked, and his lucrative real estate development contracts were aggressively terminated by his terrified investors. Cecilia Wallace, the matriarch who had completely abandoned her severely injured daughter to chase high society clout in Miami, suffered the ultimate devastating social obliteration. The highly publicized federal arrests of her husband and her golden son absolutely destroyed her pristine, flawless image. Her elite sorority sisters permanently revoked her membership, and she was entirely blacklisted from every single prominent country club and charity gala in the Chicago metropolitan area. They had ruthlessly bet their entire family legacy on a stolen foundation, and when the absolute truth was finally revealed, they were left with absolutely nothing but massive legal debts and a shattered, worthless reputation. I did not waste a single precious second of my life gloating over their complete misery. I was far too busy aggressively scaling the magnificent, empowering corporate legacy I was building entirely on my own terms. After 3 grueling months of intensive physical therapy, I walked out of that hospital on my own 2 feet. I utilized my massive personal wealth to establish a brand new venture capital firm specifically dedicated to funding, protecting, and scaling brilliant minority women developers in the decentralized finance sector. Simone Jackson became my senior lead architect, and together we built an impenetrable, highly ethical technological empire that completely dominated the market. Before we conclude today's deep dive audio fiction experience into the clinical mechanics of hostile corporate takeovers, intellectual property retrieval, and overcoming toxic family dynamics, I want to leave you with one vital, absolutely non-negotiable moral and practical lesson. Never allow anyone, no matter how closely related they are to you by biological blood, to convince you that your hard-earned professional success, your financial independence, or your personal peace is a communal family reservoir meant to subsidize their bad decisions, inflate their massive narcissistic egos, or cover their illegal financial frauds. When you encounter deeply entitled, manipulative relatives who mistake your quiet, strategic silence for weakness or total submission, do not waste your precious emotional energy shouting, screaming, or throwing theatrical tantrums. You audit their weaknesses, you locate their absolute vulnerabilities, you secure your digital ledgers, and you mathematically obliterate their access to your life. Be sure to hit that like button, Share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear the absolute power of setting boundaries. And subscribe to the channel right now for more thrilling true audio fiction and forensic corporate thrillers. Until next time, keep your boundaries completely unbreakable, your financial ledgers entirely pristine, and your peace absolutely protected. Nurse Altha stood by the locked door of my intensive care room, staring at the live stream on the massive medical laptop with absolute, wide-eyed astonishment. She watched the federal agents physically haul my screaming, disgraced brother off the luxury Miami stage in heavy steel handcuffs, completely dismantling the fake legacy my parents had abandoned me to protect. Altha turned her gaze slowly from the glowing screen and looked directly down at me, her expression a mixture of profound shock and deep, unspoken respect. I sat perfectly still in my rigid cervical collar, the violent flashing red and blue lights from the live broadcast reflecting coldly against my dark eyes. I did not smile, I did not celebrate, I simply closed the heavy laptop, terminating the feed forever. You told me you were going to cut off their financial oxygen, Altha whispered, shaking her head in sheer disbelief at the absolute precision of the algorithmic execution. I have worked in this trauma ward for over 20 years, Zuri, and I have seen countless families tear each other apart over money. But I have never seen anyone systematically dismantle a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise while physically trapped in a hospital bed. I looked up at the ceiling tiles, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. In the ruthless world of venture capital, Altha, the most dangerous entity in the room, is never the loudest person screaming on the stage. It is always the quiet auditor holding the master ledger.